Well, our next question comes from Michelle Dupler, once again from the Tri-City Herald.
Would you support providing amnesty to the undocumented workers currently living in the United States? If so, how would you determine who gets amnesty? If you would not, how would you address the resulting shortage of seasonal agricultural labor if those workers are deported?
Mr. Rossi, that goes to you.
This is a bigger issue, obviously. It's a complete and total failure on the federal government's part to control our borders. I don't support amnesty, number one, but we have to get control of our borders. We've had people that have come across and been deported and come across and been deported that have actually committed violent crimes in our state. We have to make sure that we have what we need is really a tall fence with a high gate. And that means a physical barrier so people can't just come across, because we've got to know who's coming to America. We've got to know who's coming. The high gate, why do I say high gate? Well, it's been a complete failure on the federal government's part as well to allow people to come to chase that American dream. My grandparents came from Italy, and they came through Ellis Island. And they came to America because they believed it could be a better place for themselves, their children, and their grandchildren. We want people to come here to chase that American dream, but we got to know who they are. We got to know if they have a criminal background. And we also have to have a system that allows people to come to work temporarily, whether it is in agriculture or in the high-tech industry. But we have to know who they are. We have to know if they can come here, so they can come here legally. So we have a serious challenge ahead of us. Unfortunately, the federal government has failed us. We have to do something about this. This needs to be done because our agricultural community needs help. High-tech community needs help. We need people to come here. The lifeblood of America are people that want to come here to chase that American dream like my grandparents did.
Senator Murray?
Well, I do believe that we need comprehensive immigration reform. This is something that affects our economy, it affects our way of life, and it affects our competitiveness. You know, I talked to some farmers just recently who told me that because we don't have clear laws in this country, that they don't know if they can get their crops picked that are on the trees right now. They say their businesses are in jeopardy. That is why I do support ag jobs being part of a comprehensive immigration reform. We do need to protect our borders. We need to make sure that those people who come here legally. But that includes our northern border. And I have fought administration after administration tooth and nail to make sure that our northern border is protected just as our southern border is. But we have to also make sure that those young people who've come here at a very early age and go through our schools and get good grades have a place to go when they've graduated. I talked to a young woman who says she lives in the shadows today because she came here when she was 3, and now she has no place in our country. We have to have a clear, concise pathway to citizenship that does include a fine, that does include learning English, that does include some very clear direction, and I have voted for comprehensive reform. What I did not hear out of Mr. Rossi in all of that answer was what he would include in a package that he says we failed to pass so far.
Mr. Rossi, 30 seconds.
What you just heard is Senator Murray does approve of amnesty. And so what needs to happen, though, is the first thing we have to do is to secure that border, because most all the arguments we're talking about are just kind of academic if we don't secure that border. We have to know who's coming, we have to know their background, but we have to have a system in place, and maybe like a virtual Ellis Island. It doesn't have to be a physical location, because we have the ability to do that. And so we can bring people here temporarily if they want to work temporarily, or if they really want to come to America to chase that American dream.
Senator Murray?
I think Mr. Rossi's forgotten that he didn't, when he was in the state Senate, vote for what he would call a form of amnesty. I don't know if this is election year politics or not, but he did. But I will tell you that what I believe is we need a comprehensive immigration reform system that includes ag jobs, make sure that our high-tech companies can bring workers here, that has a clear path to citizenship, and that makes sure that those farmers and those employers have a secure workforce, and we secure our borders. That's the kind of program I voted for. I will work with anybody to try and come to a reasonable compromise on this because it's important.
Now another question from KXLY4's Nadine Woodward.
Well, I think our audience will like this next question. It was inspired actually by one of our KXLY viewers. Clearly frustrated with all the mudslinging that's been going on in this race. And here it is. Both of you are running ads that depict your opponent as someone who has made poor decisions in the past. Is there anything your opponent has done for the state of Washington that you approve of?
Senator Murray, that's yours to start with.
Well, that's a great question, and I will say that I really do admire Mr. Rossi for getting into this race. I know how difficult it is and how much time it takes, and it's really hard on your family, and I know that when he got into this race, he asked his family because it's a huge sacrifice, and I appreciate that. I do know that he comes here with heart and passion, and I respect that. But I will tell your viewer who asked about negative ads that one of the things that I am deeply concerned about is the Supreme Court ruling on a 5-4 decision by one vote now allows these ads to come into our state. You don't know who's paid for them. It could be a multinational corporation or a foreign company, millions of dollars. I voted to have them at least tell you, the Disclose Act, who is paying for that. And I know Mr. Rossi opposes that. That I don't agree with him on.
We're saying something nice. Mr. Rossi, minute 30.
Well, actually, I believe that Senator Murray and her staff have done good work with veterans. I really do. And as a senator, I'm going to have great staff, and I'm going to do great work with veterans as well. But also, you talk about the ads as if there's some equivalency here. You know, we're both running ads, but mine actually have the added benefit of being the truth, and which is why the Tacoma News Tribune and the Seattle Times have called Senator Murray's ads false and dishonest and grossly malicious. Those aren't just casual words because they take a half a sentence and throw it into a whole commercial. You know, that's the problem with what's going on right now with politics, is that you're seeing, you know, things that are taken out of context and put it on TV. What you're seeing is an 18-year incumbent that's desperate to have 6 more years. That's what this is all about. She doesn't want to talk about it, the things such as, you know, the stimulus or the bailouts that she voted for the banks and others. And so she was trying to change the subject. That's really what's going on here. And you're seeing it in ad after ad after ad after ad that newspapers are calling false, grossly malicious, dishonest, doesn't pass the smell test. Those are all the things the newspapers have been saying, not me, the newspapers. And so, you know, this is a problem. This is a problem. We've come a long ways from, I think, the good intentions that Senator Murray had when she started off as a senator 18 years ago. I think she went back there for the right reasons, and I really believe that.
Senator Murray, you do have a chance to rebut if you choose.
Well, I do appreciate the endorsements of those newspapers that Mr. Rossi just cited. I'm very proud of that, and I'm proud of the work that I do for Washington State, the veterans, making sure that our local communities have the strongest advocate ever who's going to go back and fight for them to make sure they have what they need in this tough economy, making sure that we do protect everyone here and that they feel strong again. That's what I do. But again, I think it's very important that we do discuss the Disclose Act that says you have to say who on your ad, who you are and who paid for that. I do on my ads. I know Mr. Rossi does. I don't understand why he doesn't want those hedge fund managers to tell us that they're paying for those ads.
We're out of time. Mr. Rossi, you have 30 seconds.
Well, I guess if we had full disclosure, we'd talk about the fact that, you know, after the bailout of the big banks, Senator Murray has $500,000 in contributions from these big banks. And, you know, the health care bill, she has $1 million worth of contributions. I guess that's kind of the disclosure part of it, too. The bottom line is you have a senator that says one thing in Washington, does another thing in Washington, D.C., and the question is, which Washington do you represent?
Well, we move on now to another question from a viewer who videotaped his question for our candidates, and I believe Mr. Rossi will go first.
My name is Sean, and I'm from the Spokane Valley. And my questions for the candidate are, with politics becoming more and more partisan and less amicable towards bipartisanship, what are your plans on bridging that gap, even if it means going against party leadership? And are you willing to risk alienating your party membership to work for what is actually best for the American people and not for your career?
Mr. Rossi?
Well, that's actually the hallmark of what I did as a state senator. When I was chairman of the Senate Ways and Means Committee, we had the biggest deficit in state history. I had a 1-vote Republican majority. Democrats controlled the House, and Governor Locke was a Democrat, was governor at the time. And I put together a bipartisan budget that balanced the biggest deficit in state history without raising taxes. Now, when I just put together a budget, it's not just a budget. I had 51 different bills that were necessary to implement the budget. And that means we had to change 51 different laws to make the budget work. And not a single one of those bills, those 51 bills, or the budget passed on a party line partisan vote. Why? Well, because the way I looked at it, the problem was too big for one party to solve. That's exactly the way I look at it in Washington, D.C. The problem is too big for one party to solve. Unfortunately, our U.S. Senator, Senator Murray, has been working with a majority. She's number 4 in leadership. And she's been working with a majority that's been ramming through pieces of legislation after legislation, such as the health care bill, which was a highly partisan bill, the financial reform bill, which became a highly partisan bill. She's been at the epicenter of partisanship in D.C. This is what has to end. In Washington, D.C., those pieces, the problems that we have are too big also for one party to solve. But you have to open yourself up to do that. You know, what I did is I drove around the state and met with moderate Democrat senators in their hometowns, and I said, look, I need your help. I can't do this by myself. And many of them came forward to help me. And it worked out for the state because without that budget, 2 years later, we ended up with the biggest surplus the state had ever seen.
All right, Senator Murray.
Now, I always start with the premise that my state and my communities and the families I represent come first, and I will take on anyone to make sure that we take care of our state. When President Bush tried to close 3 veterans hospitals here in the state of Washington, I went after him with tooth and nail with the veterans at my side, and we kept those veterans hospitals open. When President Obama made a proposal to cut veterans health care, I went after him, and we got it reinstated so that our veterans were taken care of. When it comes to Hanford Nuclear Reservation, I have taken on Republican and Democratic presidents and will continue to do so because my state comes first. And I will work with anyone who will sit down with us to solve tough problems. It's exactly what I did when Sue Collins, a Republican from Maine, and I worked together to pass the important Port Security Act to make sure that those containers coming in and out of our ports after September 11th were not had any kind of terrorist attack that could hurt all of us and hurt our jobs and our families and our communities. It's why I worked with John McCain when 3 young kids lost their lives in a pipeline accident in Bellingham, Washington 9 or 10 years ago to pass the nation's pipeline safety laws. When it comes to immigration policy that we've talked about, or health care, or the challenge of creating jobs, I will work with our communities and our community leaders and anyone to try and solve the problems that come before this nation.
All right, Mr. Rossi, rebuttal.
Well, you didn't hear anything about how the health care bill was a bipartisan effort, because clearly it wasn't. It was a very, very partisan piece of legislation. That Senator Murray, being number 4 in leadership in Washington, D.C., with 18 years experience back there, clearly didn't reach across the aisle to bring any Republicans on, didn't even bring them in the room. And so we have a very serious problem here with a very partisan U.S. Senator. One issue after another. Financial reform was another one. You go through all the issues, and it's been highly partisan back there. You know, I'm going to work with anybody that wants to work in good faith to turn this country around. We need to do this.
Senator?
Well, what I didn't hear in all of that is how Mr. Rossi is going to work on the real challenges in front of us. Our debt, making sure that people get jobs, making sure that our veterans are taken care of. These are issues that are bipartisan. I have a strong history of working with Senator Enzi on Workforce Investment Act so that our young people have the skills they need to get the jobs in their own communities. I've worked with senators across the aisle many times, and I do find that the partisan rhetoric right now is troubling, and I'm hoping that after the election, the tax cut that he keeps referring to, we will come to an agreement on that, because it is important that our middle-class families do have tax cuts, and I will work to make that happen.
We are to the point for our last question of the debate, and we'll have to keep our answers to just 30 seconds. You will get a chance to rebut for 30 seconds as well. Our last question comes from Jim Camden.